Hey everybody, I am going to do a little bit of cleanup today and you'll see why in a minute, but I figured this was a great opportunity to share something that I do in my actual career, which is building science. I work looking at moisture and fire and thermal and air leakage performance, a little bit of structure, all of those different building science items throughout construction. And today is just a really great example of that, so I figured I would share that with you. So in the past few days, we have had temperatures in the mid to high 30s all the way up to the mid 40s. And this morning I woke up to, we're actually supposed to be hitting over 60 today. And we're getting additional moisture within that warm front that's coming through. So, as I'm sure you've noticed throughout all of your years on this planet, frost is very much a thing, and when you hit those 30 and 40 degree temperatures, you're starting to see that frost gather as the white crusty stuff that's on top of your plants and sometimes kills your beautiful flowers and things like that. So here is the converse of that. As it starts to warm, rather than frozen ice, which is basically condensation that has become a solid, we're now starting to create liquid water as condensation. So this is a fabulous example of that. You can actually see the water dripping down the windows, and it's probably noon right now. So you actually can't see out the majority of the windows. I just want to pan so you can see that. I also want to just say how much I love that I can see my porch again. It's starting to feel much more like home instead of a workshop. Although I certainly have a ways to go, and I'm hoping to get some of that handled today. So what is happening is basically the interior of this home has the ability to actually hold on to temperature, which is a good thing in a lot of scenarios where you do have these drastic temperature swings. It's a little bit more regulated inside, and that can mean that it's very cold for a significant amount of time, but then once you get it warm, it's going to stay warm. So there's kind of good and bad for that. Now we are in Texas. It tends to be hotter, so we have more cooling days than we do heating days. So typically it will stay cooler inside the house, and I'm all for that. So I can deal with winter. Now ask me in January when I don't have heat. But anyway, so what has happened is we have warm, moist air out here. It's probably in the high 50s, and that is hitting the cool temperature parts of the building. There's also going to be condensation on my siding as well. And so when that air hits this cool surface, the vapor, which is a gas, goes through a phase change and creates liquid water, which is now running down my windows. That is okay in this scenario because this part of the building is able to dry. It's all open to the elements. We get a lot of airflow through here, so that's a good thing. I actually lived in South Carolina for a number of years, and you'll see other materials which have a much tougher time being able to accommodate that, particularly things that are made of plastic, like vinyl sidings and stuff like that, where they under insulated, and now they've got this temperature difference, and they've got all this moisture in the air in South Carolina along the coast. And there are whole industries that are devoted to somebody going in and power washing all the green stuff off of the side of the wall, because you have liquid water that just sits there, it doesn't dry off, and it becomes algae and mildew and mold and all those types of things. So very glad that we don't have mold and mildew on the side of the house, and some of that has to do with the type of materials that we have and the way that the house was built. You can actually feel this really great breeze going through right now, which is wonderful. So I want to show you inside some of the effects of that as well, things that you'll probably notice. You'll probably also notice above me, yes, I did have another portion of the ceiling fall down. Actually, I was on a conference call, and it was quite stressful, so me just being able to keep myself calm was interesting, but we made it through it. And if you know me, you know I have trouble doing overhead work, so honestly, I look at this as a positive. I was blessed that nothing was damaged, just a little bit more of a mess to clean up. Less demo for me to have to do, so that's pretty cool. I don't know if you can see it, but you can see there are a couple of puckers here. And if you just heard that 3 beeps, which we're going to hear again in a few seconds, that is actually a smoke alarm that's misfiring because of this condensation issue. Now that's different from what we see here. This is actually a water leak. I assume it's old because I've never had any issues, knock on wood, say a lot of prayers. But That's actually where water came in, and my guess is somebody left a window above here open, and so that's where we see that. So you heard that beep, the 3 beeps. That is a smoke alarm telling me that it's misfiring. And what has probably happened, I've got over a dozen smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors here in the house, so it's gonna take me a little bit to figure it out. But what has probably happened is that there's condensation over the little sensor that tells me whether there is smoke or not. So I have to go figure out which one that is, and I can either air it out or vacuum it out, which will usually resolve itself. I might actually just be lazy and see what happens. It's not like I don't have other smoke detectors that are working, but it does get to be a little bit annoying. So that's another indicator when you have these major temperature and humidity swings. There you go. And then this is another great example of what's going on. So you can see it a little bit better here. See all those little bubbles in the wallpaper? And actually, I don't hate this wallpaper. So many less attractive things, less tasteful things could have been chosen. So kudos to that at least. Trying to be positive, but you'll see all these puckers and bubbles, and they're not always here. So they're here today. My guess is probably within 2 days or so, more of them will disappear. They will come back, and over time they will get bigger and bigger, and the wallpaper will start falling off the wall. We'll see kind of some areas where it's doing that. That has to do with this interface of new material and old material. So originally there was wallpaper on these walls, but it was not this type of wallpaper. So in behind here, the structure is shiplap wood. So it's very old growth, very dense. Something I would love to study in my career is how the older materials perform differently from the newer. When you have more density, you have better acoustic performance. I believe more resistance to fire. Not that it's going to give you a lot more, but a little bit more. You have much more resistance to moisture. And that's how this building has been able to perform for 150 or so years. But here we are nonetheless. So in the past few decades, what they have done is left that shiplap in place and then installed sheetrock, which the generic term for that is gypsum board. They've put interior gypsum board on these walls, and then they've put a vinyl wallpaper up. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those materials when they're used correctly. But in this scenario, you can see what's happening, and I just kind of wanted to explain that. So what is happening is I've got moist air that's starting to move around inside that wall cavity because there is no air barrier. The closest thing that we have to an air barrier here is the gypsum board and the vinyl wallpaper, which you can see is not really acting like that. So we've got air that's starting to move around. We're starting to get gaseous moisture that wants to escape out of that wall, and it has nowhere else to go. So it's starting to create these bubbles, trying to find a way to get out. And that will continue to happen because we haven't accommodated for it to leave the building. Now the materials in behind the actual structure, it was always able to accommodate that before because we didn't have that gypsum board in place, which there's nothing really wrong with gypsum other than the fact that if it's not intended for moisture exposure, it will eventually deteriorate as well. It's not meant to be exposed to water. But the gypsum board and then the vinyl actually stops everything from moving, so we've got a vapor barrier. Whereas prior to that, when it was just the standard wallpaper, which was actually a very thin sheet of material fabric, and then the paper was either actual paper, which would just disintegrate if it got too wet, or it was more of a fabric type material as well. That would have been installed. Those materials are vapor permeable, so they allow a lot of humidity to get in and out of that wall as quickly as possible. This actually slows it down. It's considered a vapor retarder. They do manufacture perforated, it's called micro-perforated vinyl wallpaper. I'm not a huge fan of that. Everybody has their own opinions, but I just feel like it doesn't do enough to really allow it to escape. And yet it also creates other issues. So a lot of the reasons why we put wallpaper on the wall is to be able to wash everything down. So you can see here, I don't know if this is the case or not, but I'm guessing little hands have touched this spot multiple times. It's kind of sticky actually. which is kind of gross. Sorry, guys. So this gives you the opportunity to kind of clean those walls and not have those areas of damage, which you'll see also paint. They do discuss scrubbability of paint as well. I've never personally really scrubbed a wall, so I can't really speak to that, but I just paint over it in most cases. But I won't be able to do that here because we're not going to be painting everything. So that is an advantage of wallpaper. However, when you go into doing the micro perforating, I think it prevents you from being able to do those types of things. At the very least, at the very most, it probably will damage it. So for all of those reasons, we will be looking at other strategies, and that will not include vinyl wallpaper. I just wanted to kind of explain why that is. So not a bad product, just the poor combination given our climate and what's going on with vapor in and out of the wall in this scenario. And anyway, so that's a little bit of an insight of what I do on a daily basis in my actual career. I deal with kind of the science behind how buildings perform and how we get temperature and moisture and humidity and all of those different things managed. And it's a lot of fun, but there's a lot more I would love to learn. Unfortunately, there have not been a lot of really great studies related to historic materials versus modern, because of course nobody's funding that. So we have to go on a lot of intuition and a lot of calculations and just previous experience. But this is a great example of that. You don't really need to have a full-fledged third-party engineered $100,000 study to figure out that's not working. So anyway, sometimes common sense is the best. You guys have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.